Olá, pessoal, boa tarde. Hoje o podcast vai ser em inglês. Essa é a doutora Nasha Winters, autora de vários livros, entre eles The Metabolic Approach, que está até aqui, ó.
Gracias.
Mas ela tem um livro sobre Viscum que não está aqui, mas é o Mistletoe, que eu já li. Então, a partir de agora, eu vou falar em inglês. Em 24 horas, o YouTube dá a opção de ligar as legendas em português, ok? Vocês podem fazer perguntas no idioma que vocês quiserem, que eu vou responder a vocês e vou repassar a ela, tá bom? So, welcome, guys. I'm Dr. Janaina Kernan. I'm a doctor and I'm an endocrinologist. And this is Metabolic Podcast. So, today we have this amazing guest. She's a woman I admire a lot of deal. We already have done one podcast about metabolic terrain, so you should look for it about cancer. This is our second one, and I hope we have a third one about pain management in cancer patients, which I think is a very relevant subject. And she's great. She told us our story in the last podcast. So in this one, we're going to focus on a very interesting thing. So before we tell you about what we're going to talk about, Nasha, welcome. I'm so glad you're here.
So good to be with you, my friend. You just are such an inspiration, and I'm so pleased that you're sharing this information with your tribe. So thank you for having me.
Tell them, like in short notice, a bit about you. Not everything, because we already did it before, but something. So because some people are coming for the first time, they're becoming acquainted for the first time. So it's nice to say a little bit of stuff. Where do you live? What do you do? The course you minister.
Perfect. So my name is Nasha Winters. I'm a naturopathic oncologist. I got into this field. I actually never wanted to work with oncology because when I was 19 years old, I was given a terminal diagnosis of end-stage ovarian cancer. Kind of caught everybody by surprise. We were looking at all the other things than cancer at that time. This is back in 1991. So it was at a time when it was not common, fortunately at that time to see somebody of that age with cancers. Unfortunately, today it's more and more common to see younger women with this condition. In fact, last week I did a consultation on a 9-year-old girl with stage 4 ovarian cancer. Like, this is the world we live in today, so things have changed. So over the last 32 years, I know, right? It's heavy and more. I've had multiple young girls under the age of 10 with this diagnosis, which is devastating.
Endocrine disruptors, food.
Oh, yes, you're nailing it. I mean, as the endocrinologist goddess among us, you can imagine all of the sources of where endocrine disruption can start in the womb, in the sperm, in the egg, well before there's gestation, long before. I mean, we're talking epigenetic mutations happening before these babies even enter the world. And then what they're being exposed to once they arrive on the other side is just devastating. And so that's part of my mission and vision over the last 3+ decades, is to change these outcomes. And we're doing so with this concept of health is within reach. So research, education, advocacy, community, all leading to health. So health within reach. And so that's what we're building. We're building this currently a virtual campus, Metabolic Terrain Institute of Health, but soon to be a boots on the ground campus in the southeastern part of the state of Arizona in the United States, state of the art, fully integrated oncology hospital and research institute on the backdrop of a regenerative farm, on a big, organic, regenerative agricultural project. So that's what's in the mix now. We're building a data platform to collect all the information as to what it takes to get healthy on this unhealthy planet. And we are training clinicians all over the world. In fact, we are blessed to have you joining us in the fall of 2023 to become one of our trained physicians. We now have 16 countries represented. You will add to our 17th country represented, and 155 physicians to date. By the end of the year, we should be another 40 people up from that. We've also trained patient advocates in 16 countries around the globe, and almost 300 of those folks trying to share the importance of a metabolic approach to cancer. So what started out as a pain and a horrible life experience has turned into my passion and my purpose. And I get to meet many beautiful, like-minded individuals like yourself that are very much wanting to change health outcomes. I just heard this morning that our statistics are now 1 in 2 people will have cancer in their lifetime.
I heard
It's
that
now,
too.
it's now matched and surpassed cardiovascular disease being the number 1 cause of death. Cancer is now the number 1 cause of death, and it's only getting worse. The World Health Organization expects this to double, cancer rates to double by 2030. So we need to make changes now. And that's why we're building our network, building our data platform, building this institute and this research environment, and planning on spreading these seeds globally.
You know, I think we could have a whole podcast about this, about the expectations of the rising numbers in cancer diagnosis, because the healthcare system won't, they don't have, in Brazil, we say they don't have legs for it. They won't deal with it because they don't have the resource, the people, the money for the new drugs that don't work, or work in 10% of patients for 3 months. To diminish the size of the tumor in 1 centimeter and kill them in the same time anyway. So we could have a whole podcast. I think this would be very interesting about perspectives and global economy and pharmacoeconomics. I think it's interesting. We should talk about this. But before people, come on, you should sign up for this channel. This will be my Brazilian YouTube channel, but I have an English one too. It's Janaína Koenen, MD. So you can follow that channel too. And share this videos around. Please share with everyone you know, because as you heard, half of the world will get cancer. 1 in every 2 people will have cancer, a cancer diagnosis in their lives. So I hope to be in the other side, but if I happen to be in the side of with a diagnosis, at least I know which path I'm going to follow. I'm blessed because I have something more to help me fight the disease. Do you know about this? Does everyone you know about this? So go for it. And today we're going to talk about mistletoe. We call it Viscum album. I have a podcast with a Brazilian doctor. He's called Mikael Marques. He's very good. He was in Germany for a long time. He's a naturopathic doctor too. And but we don't have. I have nothing in English, and not at all with a book author. Such a great book. So I loved your book. It taught me a lot. And I began studying about Viscum album, I think it was a year ago. And now I'm using it. So let's talk about this, Nation. What is mistletoe or Viscum album? What is that? Let's tell people about it.
Sure. Well, at least in the West, in the United States in particular, we recognize mistletoe as sort of being something that you see at Christmas time, that you kiss under. It's, kind of got this folklore to it. However, it has a much richer history than just something you make out under at the holidays. It has actually, we have thousands of species of mistletoe growing on many different plants and bushes and trees all over the world. And there's a handful of them that have had properties that have some cytotoxic or anti-cancer effects. So what is very fascinating is there's been a long history of using the whole plant of mistletoe in herbology for thousands of years. Hippocrates used it for disorders of the spleen, for arthralgias, so pain patterns, for headaches. This was something that was used thousands of years ago for these processes. It has been used in a lot of the more modern Western herbal medicines, as well as in the Asian cultures. Mistletoe as a whole plant extract has been used in a lot of environments very specific to what I just mentioned. It's also had a long history in using it in seizure disorders, in anxiety disorders, in arthralgias like arthritis patterns and headaches. So again, it's got a nice, long, rich history. However, this crazy philosopher, Rudolf Steiner, he started taking observations of nature and the world around him, how it relates to us and how our bodies relate to nature. And he was sort of the father of the school of anthroposophical medicine, which is really a big movement in Europe, specifically Switzerland and Germany. The second largest group, by the way, of anthroposophical physicians is actually in Brazil. I don't know if you knew that, but that's
Yeah, and the
pretty
father
cool.
of anthroposophy, one of the fathers, is Mikhail's father. So
I love
that's him. So Mikhail's
and
father is in Juiz de Fora.
wow.
I don't remember his name now. Um, if he's watching, I don't know if he's watching this.
Wow.
He could write it down, or if anyone is watching, could ask Mikhail. Mark is his father's name because he's the father of
Wow.
anthroposophy in Brazil, or one of them. So
My gosh, I've got
yeah,
chills. So it's an honor to be speaking to kind of the second largest hub of anthroposophical medicine. In fact, one of the doctors I know well from your community, Dr. Ricardo Gelman, who is part of one of the big hospitals in Sao Paulo and focuses in pediatric oncology and utilizes mistletoe therapy in that environment, is someone that's just very near and dear to my heart. So you guys really are far ahead, way far ahead of the United States with your use of and understanding of anthroposophical medicine in general, and mistletoe or Viscum album extract in particular. And so what is so brilliant is this woman, Dr. Ita Wegman out of Switzerland, and Rudolf Steiner started talking in the early 1900s about this concept of the, oh gosh, it's just left my brain. Apologies. So where you look at something in nature and it reflects back to you like, wow, that walnut looks like it looks like a brain. I wonder if it's helpful for the brain. Doctrine of signatures. I knew it would come to me, this concept of the doctrine of signatures. So when you look at mistletoe, the way it grows, it looks like a big tumor in a tree. Okay. And it's an interesting process in the plant kingdom. It's very unique in that it grows from the outside in, very different than any other plants in the kingdom. It never touches the earth.
it doesn't respect gravity.
It just doesn't respect gravity. I love that. It is grafted onto the branch from which it grows by poop of a bird that eats its seeds and disperses it, a thrush, a particular bird called the thrush, that leaves its seeds to graft into the bark that once it starts to take root and sprout. And it just has this weird quality that it flowers in the winter versus in the typical summer months. And so it's like out of rhythm. What you'll notice is it's like out of rhythm of the rest of the plant kingdom. So Rudolf Steiner noted that, hey, that seems very similar to what happens with things like cancer. Also the look of it, that it looks like a tumor growing in a tree. And somehow, God only knows, back in 1917, they understood that if you take the leaves of the summer and the berries of the winter, and you macerate them in a particular way, and then you put them into a centrifuge going one direction, and then in another centrifuge going around it, you pour in very slowly, you titrate in water very slowly. And in some of its components, you can get a fermented form of it or a non-fermented form of it. But basically, you create this very unique extract that has some rather energetic qualities, not just tangible physical qualities. And somehow, all the way back in 1917, they determined that this was a treatment for cancer in an injectable form, mind you, that could be applied subcutaneously, intravenously, intratumorally, intraperitoneally, through the bladder, you name it. We have now had this medicine available to us for 105 years, 106 years on this planet of continuous use, probably the most studied integrative oncology product we have out there, with incredible research behind it globally. So that's a very cool history of how this plant sort of came to be in our world, and we can dig into some of the mechanism of action here in just a moment. But I'll take a breath and see what questions arise.
What strikes me hard is that in Germany, 2/3 of the patients, of oncology patients, use mistletoe. And in Brazil, when I talk to oncologists, I mean, apart from the ones that follow me here, or ones that have an integrative background, which are like one or two, most of them don't even know about it, and they say it's charlatanism. And once even a pediatrician oncologist told me, "What is that? That will cause liver failure in my patient. You're going to kill my patient with Viscum. What is that?" I said, "That's funny because it's in your fatigue and nausea guideline with children."
Yeah.
And she said, "What?" Yes.
Yeah.
Haven't you read your fatigue guideline? It's for oncology patients. It's written there. It's new. It's a green cover. I'll send it to you.
I would love to see it.
They never read it. Like, they don't acknowledge its existence. They said, okay, what? And it's funny because you have meta-analysis of randomized clinical trials showing improved survival, improved quality of life, and great safety, even in high doses. So I ask myself, what's going on with this world? Where are they going? What are they reading? Why? I mean, it's 100 years of research.
Right.
It's not something from yesterday.
Yeah, right? Exactly. And not a trend.
No, it's not a trend. No.
Looking around. Yeah.
It's older than many of us, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
What I'm asking is, like, they think maybe it's something like magical. Okay, this is anthroposophical. Anthroposophy is not medicine.
Yeah.
Whoop.
Right.
So let's talk a bit about science. So independently if it's a fermented form or non-fermented form, they all have characteristics, different ones, right? And some of them have more of this and more of that. So let's talk about the composition of Viscum in general, and then we specify in the kind of fermented, non-fermented form. So what is inside Viscum?
Perfect.
In the injected form we're going to introduce in people, like we're going to give them, what is in there? What are the components? And what do they do?
Perfect. Well, I want to go back very briefly to what you mentioned before about like physicians saying, hey, I just read this is going to put your patients into kidney failure. It's really dangerous. It's a toxic plant. I actually just had this very conversation with a Stanford University physician last week who was certain that the patient's liver shutting down was thanks to a single injection of mistletoe versus the 8 blood transfusions they gave this patient. In a matter of a week or two, that they didn't understand this. I had to literally teach the Stanford doctors about the impact of secondary hemochromatosis on organ failure, specifically liver failure. And so they tried to blame it on the injection of mistletoe, which, by the way, we'll come back to this in a moment, but the injectionable form does not utilize first pass liver metabolism nor second pass. It does not interact with the P450 enzyme pathways of the liver 1 iota. Even that is in the literature well attributed to. What they were reading when they went on some of the websites about mistletoe was the whole plant extract taken in an oral form, a full herb or a tincture form, which in my world we have never used nor would recommend, because it is a toxic plant. But when you use the extract much in like a pharmaceutical way as an injectable, it has a very different behavior. So they're reading and depending on the form of a whole plant versus an extract of a plant, a constituent of a plant. So they're misinformed there, which is just embarrassing there, right? So there's that side. But the magic within even the whole plant versus the extract is this combination of different molecules, different elements that you alluded to, of lectins, which a lot of people have heard of. Like, lectins evoke an immune response. Of polysaccharides. These polysaccharides also evoke an immune response. Of various anti-angiogenic constituents, of certain constituents that invoke certain cytokine responses, so immune and inflammatory responses, turning things up or down as desired. And there are different forms on the market that have a different level. Like, you could get, for instance, the company Helixor out of Germany. They're one of the lower lectin content ones that are out there. So it has much more of the polysaccharides and some of the other constituents that are more creating an abscopal immune effect, meaning like it's kind of telling the immune system to be balanced. Whereas the cytotoxic aspects of the viscotoxins are higher in other components, like in the Iscador family. Those are very the fermented ones actually create like a strong reaction in the immune system that becomes like it invokes a fever, like the Colles toxin. I don't know if you have spoken about Colles toxin here on your podcast, but Colles toxin is sort of was the modern, the ancient version of today's modern immune therapy. Not even that ancient. I mean, it was, also about 100, 120 years ago, that we were giving people basically a little bit of a bacteria that would create a major infection, that would create a major fever in the patient dealing with cancer, and that fever would somehow wipe out the infection as well as the tumor. So that was sort of the phase before we started to realize we get a similar effect when we're doing this with mistletoe. We get a warming effect, we create a fevering effect, and there are some mistletoe components like the Iscador that introduces a little bit of an organism that creates a strong reaction, much like the Colles toxin. And then there's others that don't have any of those remnants or those fragments of any organisms. That's like a purified form, like Helixor, that has less of the viscotoxins. So we can even choose as practitioners which therapy meets our patient in the right place at the right time. So it's not at all a protocol. We choose the right host tree. We choose the right, the right potency and the right form, whether it's a fermented or a non-fermented form. And we can even base on how much we want to invoke a fever or an immune response based on the lectin content and the viscotoxin content of each of those host trees. So it becomes this really beautiful, like, okay, here's the person in front of me. Who are they? What is the burden of their body right now? What kind of tumor burden do they have? How strong is their constitution? How vulnerable is their constitution? And then we can find the best fit of this medicine to introduce into their system. And so I love this, that it allows us that very, very beautiful, skilled practice of medicine to really know the patient in front of you, to know the best application of the best host tree at the best time for that patient. This is part of why it has not taken on in standard of care, is because it takes a lot more time to be with the patient, to know the medicines and all of their options to help best choose the right therapy for the patient at the right time.
Here in Brazil, we have Iscador. So people they're watching me in Brazil. Iscador is the fermented form, and we have Helixor, which is the non-fermented form. So we have both. There are more types of Viscum album, right? But we don't have them yet in Brazil. We're trying to bring them, but we don't have them yet. But we have all forms, all potencies, and they are quite different, right? So it's even possible to use both of them, to use a fermented form and a non-fermented form, depending on the patient, right? Because maybe you want to have some viscolectins and viscotoxins, right? But let's talk a bit about the effects on the patient's quality of life. So cancer patients, usually they get cold.
Yes.
They lose the ability to produce heat. And they feel cold, right? So if you measure the temperature, it's all the same during the day. So they lose that higher temperature in the morning, and then the fall, it's all the same. And they feel fatigued and they feel cold. And when you begin Viscum, what happens, Nasha? Something really nice happens. And they come back and they tell you, Dr. Janaina, what happens?
Yeah, I love it. So this is where there's that sort of esoteric description from the anthroposophical world, but the patients don't care about the philosophy. They care about what they feel. In the anthroposophical world, what we're invoking is a warming effect, a mantle of warmth in the body, a vital, something that's provoking the internal vital force. We might know that as chi, as prana, as just overall energy, as mitochondrial, good function of your mitochondria. There's a lot of different names for this process happening in the body at a metabolic mitochondrial level. But with mistletoe from the esoterics, it's this idea of warming the core and warming from within. And that warmth, just think about when you think about, I'm flushed in warmth, I'm flushed in joy, like those moments where you feel the beam of the sun, you feel a little bit of just a little vitality returned. Some of the biggest studies we've had around mistletoe is its impact on the overall quality of life of the patient. They describe a general sense of well-being, a general sense of feeling more invigorated, a little better stamina, a little less fatigue, a little more warm to their core, and just a little more engaged in the world. Those are really big, because when we're afraid, when we're really sick, when we're in pain, when we've been overtreated, and our immune systems are really tanked, the lack of vital force in those patients is tangible, not just for the patient, but those that love them. And so it's really beautiful when the patient comments about how good they feel, but also when their loved ones say, something's different here. This patient, my loved one, my parent, my husband, my child seems like they're feeling better. And that makes the entire tribe around that patient feel better as well.
Yeah, and this positive feeling, there are lots of studies. I've been across some of them these days, preparing my speech. And I saw these papers on stress management and depression in cancer. And if you manage to help these patients feel better, less depressed and less anxious, they live more. You have less mortality in cancer patients. So it's very important that they feel better, they feel warm, they feel more energized. And this vital force, it's very, very crucial for their recovery, right? Because sometimes they come, they're like, okay, take me away. I had enough, They
Their
come like
will
this.
is gone. Yeah. Yeah.
And when you give them Viscum or mistletoe, they come back much better. They tell me something's changing here. I don't know what you're doing. Don't stop. Please don't stop. They're like, whoa. Yeah. And even if you stop with low doses, you don't have to stop. You usually don't start with big doses subcutaneously.
Exactly.
You start with a very low dose and you already feel so much better,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a beautiful thing because what I love, so in anthroposophical medicine, their philosophy around what is cancer in general may differ from what a lot of you are familiar with. Although Janina's probably brought you all to a different understanding of cancer in her work on this podcast and elsewhere. But what they understand to be is a loss of connection to self, to other, to God, but even cell to cell connection. And so when we get into the hallmarks and we get into more of the science behind cancer, it's also like a loss of signaling and signal recognition. And so there is a loss of connection in there as well. And so one of the cool things is that it seems to reestablish a connection down at that molecular level, cellular level, tissue level, organism level, and to other and spirit level. It goes all the way down to the most micro, all the way up to the most macro and everything in between. And some of the cool constituents that I've mentioned here, those lectins, those polysaccharides, those viscotoxins, they are doing some really cool things in the system. They're invoking a little bit of interleukin 2, which is what's creating a little bit of that fever. They're lowering interleukin 6 and 8. They're lowering interleukin 10 and 17, which are some of the drivers of some of the co-infections that our patients are met with. It's directly lowering that vasoendothelial growth factor, which is one of the drivers of angiogenesis. It's directly, we can tell in our testing that it directly lowers C-reactive protein. It's incredible what it's doing on those levels. It also seems to reestablish the circadian rhythm. And so that is
goes back.
Exactly. So you see that reestablishment. People sleep deeper and better. They're more awake during the day and sleeping at night versus a lot of later stage cancer patients, their circadian rhythm will be switched. So it helps for that. I know we're going to do an entire episode on pain management, but one of the most profound pain management strategies I've ever used is mistletoe, especially IV infusions of mistletoe, which have been incredibly powerful for pain management, even more so than in the injectable, the subcutaneous. So there's so much utility to this that the other thing I want to point out is that from the beginning, over 100 years, it was never meant to stand alone as a therapy. It was always brought in tandem with other therapies. It has always played well with others. Okay, whether it's from standard of care or alternative care or a combination of both. Because as we mentioned early on, it does not have any impact on those P450 enzyme pathways. It's very nice. There's virtually no contraindication with other pharmaceuticals, radiation, surgery, other nutraceuticals, other supplements, other herbs, other dietary and lifestyle modifications. Those are some things that's just really compelling. And it's, as you mentioned, upwards of 80% of the population in Germany in particular, but also Switzerland, Austria, France, around, at some point will utilize this therapy along the way, either before their treatment as standard of care, during or after for the cleanup. So it's a therapy that is literally safe to, even if you said today's my first day of chemotherapy, you could take the injection that morning. There's no contraindications. The only thing I will say, there's a caveat, is when someone's new to mistletoe, brand new, I might have them pause doing any follow-up imaging for 6 to 8 weeks. Because what can happen is like what we see in all of our modern immune therapies is you can see a little bit of a swelling of the lymphatics or of the tumor itself, which could be misinterpreted as progression on imaging, where it is more of a pseudo progression, and that the inflammation that it brings to the tissue to fight the cancer will swell that tissue before it destroys it. And so if you scan too soon, you could be actually seeing pseudo progression, not true progression, and confuse the reality there. Whereas if you wait a little bit longer, you'll start to see that destruction, the breakdown of the tumor in response after it's had that initial inflammatory response. So it's really interesting there to consider. And then sometimes on the imaging, if people are doing subcutaneous injections, the radiologists will note that there's like, they don't really know what they're looking at, but they'll often say, wow, there's some type of an immune response up at the surface level. What is that all about? They don't quite know what it is. But what we know that it's doing on the subcutaneous, it's interacting with at a 45-degree angle. When we inject that into the tissue, we're engaging with the B cells of our immune system really beautifully. When we do the the intravenous injections or the intratumoral or the bladder insufflation, the bladder treatments of this, we're engaging with more than just the B cells. We're engaging with a lot of other things happening in our circulatory system. So there's some really cool things that are happening. You get a little bit of a different kind of mechanism of action depending on the entry of treatment, the method, the delivery of the treatment. So those are some things I think are just really, really unique to this medicine, that it plays well with others, that there's virtually no contraindications. Although Iscador, being that's one that you use a lot in your country, we don't like to use that with brain metastasis, primary brain cancers, or space occupying lesions, because the swelling can actually happen very, very quickly and actually be overwhelming to those parts of the body. But you could use the other forms in those times, like the Helixor is very safe to use in those situations. We also don't want to use mistletoe when someone's actively fevering because of another infection or something else going on, because we won't be able to know what's doing what. And we don't want to further, especially if you're using a fermented form, if there is an infection, we don't want to bring on other little organisms that could perpetuate that. So again, this is pushing us to get to really know our patient and have them know themselves. And then that person and their body has a relationship with the mistletoe, and the clinician has a relationship with both of them. And it creates a very unique, personal rapport and personal relationship between patient, provider, and plant that's just not heard of in other parts of the medical oncology world.
Yeah, there's an energy in cancer patients, and Viscum album brings their immune system back, including some people, some doctors, some oncologists, they say you can't use anything during chemo. And actually, this is not true, because mistletoe can even help with cytopenias.
100%.
So, yeah, I would like you to comment on that. This is a side effect of chemotherapy, guys. We have cytopenias, plaquetopenia, and neutropenia, which is awful. For the patients. And that's something, you kill the tumor and kill the host too. So actually what we need is to wake up the immune system. So it's a perfect match if you use something that's going to help your immune system, like LDN or melatonin and mistletoe and mushrooms. I love the mushrooms too. And mistletoe is very safe during chemo, during radiotherapy, and it's actually desirable because what do you have? You have nausea. You have nausea, you lose weight because of the chemo toxicity of the chemotherapeutic agent, because you're with nausea, you don't eat, But cachexia is not something about calories only, right? It's about the tumor consumption because of chemotherapy side effects. And if you have something that helps in any way, like mistletoe helps with the nausea, with the cytopenias, with the side effects of the treatment, why not?
Exactly. This is what I think is so beautiful about it, is it's not telling people not to do standard of care. It's saying, we're going to make your standard of care work better for you. You're going to be able to stay on track with your treatments more regularly, because you're not going to have to pause because your counts got too low. You're going to have a better quality of life through the process. And we're actually bolstering up the part that is what treats the cancer to begin with. Okay. So it was not that long ago, my friends, that everyone thought I was knucking futz for saying that the immune system had something to do with cancer. and both treatment of or prevention of. We were poo-pooed forever in that field. But now that it's a multi-trillion-dollar industry, upwards of $4 trillion, the immune therapy world right now, and that all of our research dollars and all of our, hey, this is our saving grace, this is what's going to save us all, are the checkpoint inhibitors and the immune drugs that are on the market, CAR T and all of those, the CTLA4 inhibitors, like all of those patterns today are being those are where we're putting all of our money and research. And yet those drugs, less than 20% of the population will even respond to those drugs.
And not for a long time.
Exactly. And that's the vast majority will have such terrible side effects. They'll either A, have to stop the treatment, B, be like ruined from the treatment, like have a quality of life where their thyroids are destroyed or whatnot beyond that, or C, they actually die from the treatment. And so what's very interesting is this is a therapy that is going to help all of our standard of care work better and help the patient have a better experience throughout. And it treats that pancytopenia. We get to use this. If I can get a patient on this before they initiate chemo or radiation, patients don't need the drugs like Neupogen or Neulasta, which are very, very, very hard on the bone marrow and add to a lot of oxidative stress and actually kind of hasten poor prognosis. So we want to avoid those drugs as much as possible. They also help us keep the platelet counts good and the red blood cell counts good, so we can avoid the dangers of transfusions. Platelet, iron, and blood transfusions are some of the quickest ways to send people into their graves. It's just such an oxidative stress process that overwhelms the body's ability to clean up all of that inflammatory process. And so that's a big one, right? And we want something that's going to keep that at bay. The energy that you talked about, the appetite, this invokes some of the ghrelin, for appetite in the brain. It also has a really beautiful impact, as we mentioned, on the circadian rhythm, but it also has a powerful impact on the metabolic process. It helps that shift that we're trying to prevent, where the body goes into the broken metabolism that really drives and fuels cancer, which, as Janeda pointed out, cachexia is going to take the lives of anywhere from 50 to 70% of our patients, which is not about their caloric intake. It's about a pro-inflammatory process and a metabolic derangement. So basically high insulin with high interleukins like interleukin 6, 8, C-reactive proteins, NF-kappa beta, that is what's going to kill the patient. And so when we have a medicine, this herbal extract that can lower those inflammatory processes and upregulate and stabilize the metabolic processes, we prevent one of the side effects that takes most of the lives of our patients together. So I don't understand why this has not just been part of every patient's treatment. And when we were all learning about the therapies for immune therapies a few years back, a lot of our colleagues were really nervous about pairing mistletoe with those therapies and in concern that we might make a stronger immune reaction. But what I found, if you are a seasoned provider, you've been trained and you understand what you're looking for your patients, you can actually mitigate and modulate that overzealous immune response that can happen on some of those immune pharmaceuticals, to actually have the patients have a better response to even the conventional immune therapies of today. So there's such utility that says we don't have to choose conventional or alternative. We can do these together and make both sides of the coin function at its most optimal.
No, actually, we can, but we should. That's the thing that has to change. We should do them both, because if you don't look at the cancer as a metabolic point of view, as a behavioral lifestyle point of view, like your book, like the metabolic terrains of your book, I always tell my patients, you should read this book. If you want to know why you had cancer, of course, there's genetics. But if you want to know, did I do anything? Is there anything I can change? Because some people, they are fatalists. They're like, okay, I got cancer. There's nothing I can do now. It's already happened. No, you're wrong. Your response to therapy depends on what you do from this day onwards. And if you don't change whatever drove you to this, you're not going to have the same response as someone who changes the behavior, the sleep, the stress, the food. Yeah? I have some doctors here that they treat cachexia giving anything, sweets, drink, soft drinks. And I'm telling you, go to a ketogenic diet. There's good evidence that ketogenic diet is good for cachexia, prevents cachexia. There's clinical trials right? The
Tons.
ketocomp
Yeah.
in all kinds
Yeah.
of tumors. So I have this lesson at my YouTube. It's a free lecture with evidence and slides only about cachexia and ketogenic diets, not causing loss of lean mass. Because that's the first thing people say. If you go low carb, not even keto, if you go low carb, you're going to lose weight and you're going to die. And there's no evidence whatsoever. I said, my God, guys, you can't say this. This is criminal. You have to read the literature before you say something like that. This is criminal. You know? And about the immunotherapy, there's something really interesting you said. I wanted to ask you, when a patient is in immunotherapy, some oncologists, they get really worried about viscomycin and mistletoe. And they say, oh, this is going to bring about a crisis and autoimmune disease. But since we also can use mistletoe in autoimmune diseases, right, with very good results. Of course, it's completely different. It's low doses and very weak forms to immunomodulate, but we can. So it shouldn't be contraindicated. We just should know how to use them in a different way in people who are going in immunotherapy. So I wanted to ask you, do you prefer to use a non-fermented form rather than a fermented form in patients with immunotherapy? Or you don't make this difference? And we didn't talk about the treats, the host trees.
Oh, good.
I'd like to talk about that too, because it's so interesting. I want to know also if you make sex difference in women and men or not, gender differences or not. And in this case, if you make the difference between fermented and non-fermented form in immunotherapy, about the strength, if you start a bit like P forms in fermented or 0.1 or 1 milligrams in the non-fermented forms, what do you do in immunotherapy? What do you think should be done?
Perfect. So I have been using mistletoe in some form or fashion, a variety of the Iscador, the Helixor, the Viscocin, the Lectinor, the Adnoba, the Iscusen. These are some of the different companies on the market. And I've really used most of the plant host trees along the way. So I'll talk about that before I come back to the answer to the immune therapy, because they kind of tie into each other. So what people, because there's so many and we don't have time to go in, the most common ones are the apple tree, which is the Mali form, the ash tree, which is the Abiatus form, and the pine tree, the Peony form. Those are the most common that's across the board. There's also the Quercus that's used a lot in the Iscador world. And then just to give you an example, in the Abnoba world, the fir tree is the highest lectin content of all of the mistletoes out there. It's non-fermented, but it's just a super high lectin content. And then in the Iscusen world, there's things like the willow tree mistletoe and the hawthorn mistletoe. There's a lot of different plants that you might know from other remedies out there. So just to give you that sense that there's these beautiful kind of personalities of each of the host trees. So I like to give the example of breast cancer, because this helps people understand its utility. So if I have somebody who's coming to me and they are dealing with, they've got a Hashimoto's that's flaring, so a thyroid autoimmune condition that's flaring in that moment, and they're kind of weak, they're in the midst of chemotherapy, I'm going to start with the lowest lectin and lowest viscocin, the lowest viscotoxin content, which is in the Helixor family of the Abiatus, that form that is the gentlest. We call it kind of like mistletoe for dummies. It's such a gentle, when in doubt, that's a safe place to start across the board. Right? Isn't that, it's like it's like, okay. In fact, when I first started using these therapies, I stayed in that range because I just wanted to be safe for myself and for my patients, right? So that's a place we'd look at. But then if I have another woman who comes to me and she's premenopausal, and she is, really tall and thin, and she's dealing with a triple negative breast cancer, I might use the pine form, the Peony form. And that would be kind of like, because I think about it, like the patient even kind of looks like a pine tree, sort of tall and thin, pretty robust. It's got some strong lectins in there. It's the highest lectin content of the Helixor family. So they've got a robust enough system that it can meet that plant really head on.
Yeah, and it's an aggressive cancer too.
Exactly. A more aggressive cancer met with a more aggressive mistletoe, right? Then if we have like a postmenopausal woman who's a little roundish, she's, got a little apple belly, she's got some pre-diabetes or diabetes process going on, that's where we want to use the apple, the mallee. So you can even see that the plant, you kind of can even match it to what the person looks like and how they express. I'm really oversimplifying, but I want you to understand that we get to meet the patient first, know who they are first before we choose the right therapy. And the beauty is we can mix and match. We can change this up at any given time. The process is done that you don't start at a high dose. You start at a dose that's the lowest of its series. Okay. So like the series 1 of the aviatus, for instance, in someone who's really fragile or having a strong immune reaction to a conventional immune therapy or has an autoimmune flare going on, you would want to start with like the Helixor A aviatus form at the lowest dose possible. And you titrate. This is the beauty of this medicine. You basically invite the immune system to meet itself again. And you keep slowly injecting every other day, no more than 3 times a week. And you don't give another injection until the previous injection response is quieted down, which is a desired local cytokine response. Maybe a little redness, a little itchiness, a little soreness, a little, hardness under the skin. That says, hey, you're still having a nice immune response. You don't give another injection until that calms down. You stay within the same dose that they had a nice response to until they stop responding to that. And then you slowly take them up to the next dose. Hang out there until they stop responding, then to the next dose. And so it's this beautiful dance, this invitation that the agenda is not about the doctor's agenda. It's about the relationship between the medicine and the patient, right? And how they're responding. And that is how we start to retrain the immune system in a really gentle, invitational way. Whereas standard of care immune therapies today are like hitting you with a Mack truck, right? They're like, get out of the way. We're just going to we're going to pull the brake off and we're going to push you into this Th1, this T helper cell 1 pathway, which is a strong autoimmune pathway. And it obliterates the vast majority of us because, again, so many of us are walking around with already predispositions to autoimmune autoimmune issues. Thank you, living on the modern planet.
They already have leaky gut. All these patients have leaky gut.
Exactly. And then you throw these drugs in and their bodies explode in the opposite direction. So they may not die of cancer, but they may die of thyroid completely dying, liver failure, kidney failure, lung problems, just massive gastritis that the gut can't, like, literally it's just like Swiss cheese to their gut and they're just like bleeding tissue and oozing. It's awful. Like when somebody has a bad reaction on those drugs, they wish for cancer. Like it's that bad, right? So this is the place where the mistletoe, when done appropriately, because I have seen practitioners who were not properly trained create the same type of response in patients, just like a standard of care conventional immune therapy. You can overdo it. You can go too big, too fast, too furious. That's why we go slow and slow. And we also need to retrain our patients' brains that just because a little bit was good does not mean a lot more is better.
Yeah.
It's
like CBD. Too much is not good.
Exactly. We want a subtle reaction. And because it's in that subtle reaction, it's like helping the patient reconnect to themselves. We talk about the immune system being 3 R's: recognize, respond, and remember. We end up with cancer when 2 or 3 of those are no longer functioning, right? And so this is the place where mistletoe can be used as an early stage. When you're first diagnosed, to get you ready for treatment. It can help you tolerate your treatments longer, and it can help you in the survivorship and prevention of recurrence. But there's even studies about using it as almost like a vaccine in families that have certain genetics, such as ATM mutations, Lynch mutations, BRCA mutations, CHEK2, GATA3, ESR1 or 2, MLH1. These are all genetics that put you in a familial predisposition to cancer. So we certainly want to make sure that the immune system is able to recognize, respond, and remember, and do its job accordingly.
Since you said that, I wanted to say this in the end, but I think it's the perfect spot to say this. People think we only want to treat cancer, but the more we study metabolism and metabolic flexibility in cancer, we know that metabolism is not all, right? Because if you block glucose, it uses glutamine, it uses citrate, it uses amino acids, it uses what you give him, right? But especially in families with mutations and in all the other families, because we know cancer is like 5% is genetically based.
Right.
We want to prevent cancer. If half of the world is going to get cancer diagnosis in their lives, is there anything that can be done? Yes, there is. I'm looking in your eyes. Yes, there is something you can do.
Yeah.
And the more you listen to us, the more you're going to wake up. So wake up, that movie.
Wake
up. You have to wake up. And doctors are they're fast asleep. They're like completely gone. They have to wake up. They have to come back. Lifestyle is the key to prevent cancer. Environmental, of course, exposition too. But lifestyle is something everyone is neglecting. Yeah. And if you don't use it to treat cancer, if you don't change this during treatment and afterwards, because I have patients I have a patient, she had a triple negative breast cancer with metastasis in the axilla. She did everything right. She fasted. She did hyperbaric oxygen therapy. I gave her supplements. In 4 sessions of chemo, everything disappeared. They were like, what? And then they finished it all. And then afterwards, she got operated, and there was nothing left, like only scars. Yeah. And then, now she's cured. Okay, let's go back to soft drinks and fast food. And I saw her like 6 months ago. She gained like 10 kilograms. I said, what? You already had 1? Do you want to have 2? Yeah. No, this is not going to happen to me. I said, what? I have patients that come to me with 70 years old. They had 3 cancers, 4 cancers, because they didn't wake up.
Exactly. You cannot return to the soil in which you got sick. You just cannot. It's an impossibility. You have a new life. It's life. And so as someone who's 32 years out from a stage 4 cancer diagnosis, who's got the BRCA gene mutation, who has other genetic mutations. Yep. Yeah. And so all of these pieces, right? All of these things, standard of care says I should have been dead a long, long time ago. It is a constant vigilance of just knowing I lived my life differently from that moment forward. I am not willing to go back. I don't need to go back to pre-cancer because it's the pre-cancer life and lifestyle that got me cancer to begin with, right? Yeah. I didn't know what I didn't know then, right? I did not know what I know now. But now that I know, there's no way I would ever go back. There is literally not a processed sugar on this planet that would ever make me want to deter from this from my plan moving forward. Nothing tastes as good as healthy and surviving feels. Right? No relationships are toxic, and like I would not stay in toxic relationships in business, in love, in friendships if they were no longer fueling and feeding my body. I would not knowingly put myself in harm's way with toxicants, known toxins. These are the things that once you learn these things, you have to take those steps forward. Because when you look at the fact that half of us will have this diagnosis, no one is coming to save you. No one is doing it for you. You have to educate and be empowered by yourself and reach out to people like myself and Dr. Janina, who can help you understand the chronology of the why you got here, where you are in this moment, and what tools at what dose, duration, and combination are going to be the best to move you forward into your best health ever.
Yeah, that was deep, right? I hope you all rewind it afterwards and listen to it like 5 times, 6 times, because this is the most important part of the podcast, and it's not about mistletoe. Yeah, but it's about life. People, you don't know how badly you're addicted to sugar and to screens and to toxic relationships. So this is something that's making the whole mankind sick. And if we don't change that, nothing's going to get better. Actually, it's getting worse by the day. Yeah. So you should pay attention, because in 10 years' time, someone will say, oh, Neisha and Janaina were there in that podcast talking about this 10 years ago. No one listens. So I hope this doesn't happen and you share this podcast, okay? So just coming back to mistletoe, about I was gonna ask you about something about the the intravenous form. Okay.
Yes. Yep.
Some people are afraid of using high doses because when they do it subcutaneously, right, it's like 1 milligram, 5 milligrams. Yeah, and before the intravenous form, it's still in the
Yeah.
subcutaneous form.
Yep.
I had something I'd like you to comment on. Allergic
Yeah.
patients. Some patients they come, they are so allergic. That's why the cancer came out in the
Right.
first
Right.
way, right? But they don't respond to 1 milligram doses, and they say nothing's happening. It's not working. It's not working. And then the temperature doesn't rise because I always tell them, listen, you should expect some redness, some soreness in the
Yeah.
place where you apply the injection. That's great. We want that, okay, until 5 centimeters, not more. You should expect a rise in temperature, not like a high fever. Like some
Just a-
fever, you shouldn't take paracetamol or in Brazil we have Dipirona, which is not, it's forbidden in Europe. You shouldn't take anti-inflammatories. You should let this temperature
let it
be,
ride.
right? Because we want that. But some patients have nothing.
Right.
So what do you do? How long do you wait until you raise the dose? Because some doctors, they take like 2-3 months. Some patients don't have 2-3 months. So that's something.
Exactly. So I think that's one, is depending on the acuteness of the patient. Are we dealing with an end-stage, stage 4 process? Are we dealing with someone who's got a stage 1 or 2 where we've got some time? Where are we with that? Number 2, what is their vitamin D level? If their vitamin D levels are low, they're going to be less responsive to mistletoe. They're going to be less responsive to all immune therapies, even low-dose naltrexone. So you have to optimize their vitamin D level. Number 3, are they on other medications that are immunosuppressive? So maybe they're taking preload steroids with their chemo, and for whatever reason, that patient's way more susceptible to that. Or they're taking a biologic treatment like Humira or something for their rheumatoid arthritis. Those can stunt the response. The other thing that is I check at that time is the patient's injections technique. So if they're going too deep or too shallow with the needle, that's a problem. It really needs to be at a 45-degree angle in a taut surface. We're usually taught to pinch the skin before we put in a needle. You actually want to tighten the skin, like spread it out. Get that needle in there so you can engage with the B cells. If a patient is still not responding after we get all of those things tuned up, then I have them do what's called the leg test. So sometimes, for whatever reason, our leg will respond more than the belly. If that doesn't respond, we consider switching host trees and go to a higher lectin or a lower lectin, depending on the situation. And sometimes we'll check for like an IgG or an IgA deficiency, because sometimes those can be really in place. So those are some places that I start with to kind of like go through a couple troubleshooting spots with the patient. When I have someone who seems like everything's panned out, they're okay, their eosinophils are actually even up a tiny bit on their blood counts, which tells me that they're probably having some type of immune reaction.
Eosinophils go up too.
They do. They should go up a little bit. They go up too high, you're getting too strong of a dose. You need to low down. But if it stays like goes up a point or two, that's desired. But if that's the case and they're really in trouble, they're a stage 4, that's when I'm going to graduate them immediately to a fever induction IV approach. That needs to be done with a very well-seasoned, well-trained provider in more of a clinical in-house, preferably, or very close to in-house environment where you are basically titrating the dose up in an intravenous application over several days' time. So maybe starting at like 200 and going up to 600 and 800 and 1200 until you get a desired fever effect. That can often pop people who've had kind of just a no response immune system. Maybe they've been overtreated. Maybe they've had, like you mentioned, long-term immune dysfunction. Maybe they're on drugs or they're that can really pop them up and through it in a very, very profound way. And then after that, they tend to be able to respond beautifully to the subcutaneous injections again.
Usually, at a regular basis, usually we infuse here in Brazil 100 milligrams of, but the P form of the non-fermented form.
Got it. Of the Helixor brand.
Yes.
Yep.
Right away. Like we don't titrate it. We begin with 100 and then, but it's not. We don't usually go up like 200, 400. You use it, right? You use high doses, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I've used, so when I had a private practice, I would have patients come for 2 weeks and we would do this approach, or day one, it would be, we do an arm test in the office of a load just to make sure they're okay. If it's okay, then we go right to the 100 or 150. Then the next day, if that's okay, depending on the patient's robustness, we might do 300 to 400. We would titrate up because we only had them for 5 days, Monday through Friday, for 2 weeks, right? So we would take them up until we got them to a response where they had a nice, good fever, and then we'd keep them at that dose. Most people would have some strong response between 600 and 800 seemed to be our magic spot. So we did pretty high. And this is on the Helixor or Viscosan form in the United States. That's what we would get to. And then we would just keep them at that dose the rest of their 10 days there. And then they'd go home and maintain with a subcutaneous form. Maybe at that time they go home with an Iscador or an Apnova or a different type of host tree or different type of company for their injections at home. But that fever induction process has a very powerful utility in getting people up there pretty quickly. I have found that a lot of our colleagues are a little hesitant to go higher dosing on the intravenous, which is okay. Like until you get your comfort, until you really know what you're working with, it's smart to stay at the lower dose. But once you realize, I mean, I've gone as high as 2,800.
Wow, that's high dose.
It is high dose. Study safety profiles up to 7,000, by the way, but we don't go there. If a patient, really my rule of thumb this many years out from doing the IV is if they haven't responded by 1,400, they're probably not. I've only had a handful of patients never respond to mistletoe. And that's okay. It means that it's not for everybody, right? But even then it's for most people, which is interesting. It really does have utility. And there's, in my mind, not one better than the other. It's not better to do IV over sub-Q. For the first almost 11 years of practice, I only had sub-Q. And we had amazing, I had people literally on deathbeds that were unconscious, crying out in pain from their being unconscious that we did an IV on. And this woman has got a book coming out. This was 12 years ago. So there's like things like that of people who were on their deathbed coming out of this. That wasn't expected. I was trying to make this person comfortable as they were taking their last breath. And lo and behold, the lights came back on. Same thing with sub-Q. I've had patients with that couldn't afford it, couldn't travel to us, whatever. For years, sub-Q was all we used. And they had just as incredible returns and responses where standard of care had failed them over and over and over again, 5, 6 lines of standard of care. And now we've brought some vitality back to them and response back to them with the mistletoe years and years and years later, hundreds, if not thousands of stories like that. So it's exciting to me when my colleagues and I put out the book, Mistletoe and the Emerging Future of Integrative Oncology, that came out. Yeah, it's great. It came out November 2021 in the US and in Europe in February 2022. This was a co-authored book with 6 of my other colleagues, from hematological oncologists to anthroposophical physicians to MDs to a naturopath to we're a mixed bag of people who collectively have hundreds of years of experience with mistletoe between us. And so it's a really beautiful book that really walks through the history of it, the mechanism of action, the host tree discussion, the discussion of the mantle of warmth, as well as a lot of really provocative case studies and research throughout the entire book, and even sort of some explanations of a typical approach, like how would we typically put somebody on sub-Q or IV. And so it's a great research. We actually wrote it as sort of like a manual or a best practices for clinicians, but it's also been great for patients to read so they understand the why of this therapy. So we're hoping it comes out in other languages in the future. It's a
Let's translate it to Portuguese.
Exactly. And it's a book, it's a nonprofit.
I can help.
You do, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's a nonprofit book that goes back into research for mistletoe. So it's not coming into anybody's pockets. This is about trying to bring a therapy, the oldest integrative oncology therapy around, to bring it into the homes and households of every single patient that's ever been met with a diagnosis of cancer.
You're talking about vitamin D, and that I just remembered last time I had an oncologist call me because the vitamin D was so high, the patient was going to die. And it was like 80. And I said, no, come on, please don't say that. Because I was giving like a 10,000 dose daily.
Yeah.
And he said, this dose is extremely high. Vitamin D was great. It was 32. It's excellent. It's above 20. I said, no, you're crazy, man. You don't have a clue about vitamin D. So when you say, because you said adequate levels of vitamin D, let's just define here.
Sure.
Because in Brazil, if you have the reference values from 20 to 100, and doctors in the last 4 months, this has been a discussion here in Brazil.
Wow.
And they concluded, I don't know based on what, that 30 is a good number for children, pregnant women. And, and we have data that autism can be caused in women, pregnant women with vitamin D levels less than 40. So less than 40 is something that I can't even imagine from me or my son. So in cancer patients, what do you consider adequate as vitamin D levels go?
So remember, our RDA nutritionists are literally like, here's just enough vitamin C so you don't have scurvy. Here's just enough thiamine so you don't have beriberi. Like here's just enough vitamin D so you don't have osteomalacia, you know, or like these soft bones. And so this is not therapeutic. So when they say 30 is your cutoff, 30 is what helps your bones from basically being wet noodles, right? That's literally as good as you're getting there, folks. You are not getting into both disease treatment and prevention at a dose that low, at a level that low. My safety net, if you are absolutely of perfect health, you've got no cardiovascular disease, you've got no dementia, you've got no diabetes, no metabolic issues, no autoimmune issues, no cancer, which means that's nobody on the planet, right? Your body needs to be at least at 50. That's my bottom. When I look under 50, I'm looking. So by the way, I'm looking for cancer 100% in people with a level below 30. It already, cancer is on board when you see that. Okay. Under 50, I'm looking for other chronic illnesses. Cancer could be included in that camp. Where we're at a place of prevention of and treatment of disease needs to be anywhere from 80 to 150.
Yeah.
And what you're watching is their calcium, their serum calcium
and
levels.
PTH.
Exactly. But even then, a good old serum calcium, if it's above 9.5 US standards, US levels, I'm making sure that patient is also then taking in vitamin K2 to make sure they're pulling the calcium out of serum and back, either out of the body or into the bones. Otherwise, we have no issues with patients being that level. That's suddenly where you see this person feels better, their hormones are better, their sleep is better, their metabolic health
Thyroid
is better. Exactly. Everything gets better. And so I push people up to that level. One of my mentors actually uses high doses in the vitamin D levels to treat lymphoma, getting levels upwards of 250, watching for PTH and calcium levels. Obviously, this is done under a medical supervised environment, but I want you to know that in my entire practice, I've never seen a single, nor has there been a reported case of vitamin D3 toxicity. And I've seen levels as high as 400 and 500 with no toxicity. Okay. So those are things to be looking at when you're working with a provider. They need to be looking at your 25-OH and your 125-OH and your serum calcium levels. And if you do have a history of parathyroid or a history of ongoing elevations of your calcium levels, a PTH is going to be needed. Then we know exactly how high we can push you and support you to get you into therapeutic dosings of your vitamin D, and which then makes you just so responsive to all these other immune modulating therapies.
And even if you have hyperparathyroidism for an adenoma, I have this very interesting case. I treat endometriosis in a metabolic way here in Brazil. And my patient with endometriosis, she began my protocol, and she had an adenoma, which she was preparing to undergo surgery. And when she went to the surgeon, he ordered a PTH, and it was low, like normal. And I said, I swear she has an adenoma. It's because I'm treating her for her endometriosis, you know? And he was like, no, it's impossible. I said, no, I swear, look, this is the scintigraphy. This is the PTH. Wow. She had high vitamin D and high PTH. I swear to you, it's because I have this protocol. And he was like, cancer responds. Adenoma is like a cancer. It responds, so it's lower. So you can take it out. And he did, and it was an adenoma. And then he called me, man, you're crazy. I want to know about this protocol of yours because I've never seen this. I said, yeah, it's a ketogenic diet and lifestyle changes and some supplements and stuff like that. And my patient, she was off endometriosis and then off the adenoma because she operated. But when you were talking about the breast cancer lady with the thyroid issues, this, I don't know why, but I have to say this. It's nothing related to Viscom, but there are some papers that came out, some clinical trials with iodine and molecular iodine, the ion, how do you call it? Iodate?
Iodine or
Yeah,
iodide?
iodide.
Potassium
Yes, iodide and,
iodide.
and molecular iodine with breast cancer and thyroid issues.
Yeah.
So we know for a
Right.
fact that thyroid likes iodide and breast likes iodine, molecular iodine. And I have seen very frequently, women with cysts and thyroids and nodules and breast nodules too,
Yeah.
and increased density of the breast.
Yeah.
And they have this paper that came out with women with breast cancer in which they supplied 5 milligrams of molecular iodine, and they had longer survival scores, they had less recurrence rates, better response to chemotherapy, and they felt better. So I said, I don't understand. This is like 1 year or two, this paper. No one is talking about it here. And in Brazil, if you talk about molecular iodine or Lugol drops for anyone, it's charlatanism. And I said, but this is a randomized clinical trial, controlled, and they showed improving survival. And some drugs are coming to the market with surrogate outcomes. It makes me mad. So have you seen this about iodine and iodide and thyroid issues and women with thyroid issues and breast issues?
We could probably get into a whole podcast on this alone. And also I've got to hop on my next call here in a moment, but I want to say that I'm actually not a fan of iodine or iodide. And I've learned the hard way, because when I did use it a lot in my practice a few years ago, I caused a lot of major problems. I caused Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which actually then worsened all the prognosis in all my breast cancer patients. I caused Parkinson's because we had TPO receptors in our hippocampus.
But you use it in patients with high TPO, anti-TPO levels? I never used it.
But it causes elevated TPO.
It depends on the patient.
So because I test everybody on this is something where I learned the hard way that something that seemed like a really good idea, and I used it for thousands of patients for a period of time, I actually got away with it. And I'm actually pretty passionate about not supplementing iodine. I'm fine with people eating. I know. Well, when I think when
but because I'm an endocrinologist and I see the patients with thyroid issues for a long time, I actually choose the patients. I know I don't use it for everyone. So maybe that's because
I think because you are at least thoughtful, you test and assess and address. So you're very on top of that. But I use that for a long period of time. I saw the test results. I saw the scan results. I saw what was happening. And I really pulled away from it because it's a very much kind of an internet recommendation of cancer care. And so I really tell people, unless you absolutely know what you're doing and are working with someone who's testing you carefully, you will make things worse. So I do want to leave it with that piece. And we go through, there's actually a lot more evidence about its cause of problems in cancer progression versus support of. So there's times and a place where I did use it in practice, like painting of the cervix for breast lumps that would go away, which was pretty cool, but it was like a get in, get out process, using, getting the right amounts of the right quality of food, the right other minerals, magnesium, selenium, the DAK balance is really powerful in this. So it's really beautiful. So I'm glad that this conversation comes up because it comes up a lot. And I think that with folks, the main thing to remember is no matter what, never guess, right? We have such the ability to test and assess everything. And unless you are Dr. Janina, who is also a board certified endocrinologist who understands intricately the complexity of the thyroid as well as the thyroid breast connection, please don't go and apply that to yourself without having something guide you along the way.
A patient died in Brazil. A woman died in Brazil. That's important you say that because some patients, they come into my Instagram and they say, how much of iodine should I take? I said, I don't know. I'm not your doctor. How can I tell you? Because this patient, she decided she was going to take iodine on her own without any doctor's advice. And she had Graves' disease, which was dormant. And this is hyperthyroidism, and it's very aggressive. And if you give iodine, it's like putting wood into the fire and throwing gasoline at it. So she died of a thyroid crisis. So everything in life, it depends. Like the poison and the medicine, it's a dose, it's a indication, it's the moment in that person's disease. So everything needs a doctor. Me and Aisha, we were talking about this just before the podcast began. There are lots of supplements in cancer. I study them. I've been studying very little time compared to you. It's like since 2017 when my father died. So it's 5 years, 6 years now studying a lot about supplements. The more I study, the more I urge you, patients, don't take
Yes.
supplements on your own, because
thank you.
this is not mathematics.
Yeah.
You have drug interactions, supplement interactions. You have the moment in which you should begin or you should stop. Don't take antioxidants in cancer unless it's doctor prescription, and even if a doctor prescribes, take care because some antioxidants really can help cancer fight chemotherapy, and you don't want that. So I think you should take care. Don't do it on your own. Have a doctor.
I love that you're saying that. Yes, yes. And I'm telling you guys, this woman, she is one of the smart, like this is what she makes it seem so easy. It is not. And she is so committed and such a researcher and such a living laboratory herself that, I mean, Janina, like your
Okay.
brilliance, it's such an honor to have you in my life as a colleague on this, that you're joining our network, that you're spreading the words of this. You are helping people know that there is a better way, and that there is a way that's individual to each person. This is the gifts you bring to all of us. And it's an absolute honor to just share in this education platform with you.
And I hope you come back again. I know you have something afterwards right now, right? So I want to thank you so much for being here. I think I learned a lot because
Me too.
I've been
Always.
using mistletoe for a while, but I mean, it's always very thrilling to talk to someone who has been using for years and
Yeah.
has so much experience like you have. I'm thrilled that I'll begin the Metabolic Terrain course. I'm going to be part of your team now. I'm very happy. I think I know nothing, like Socrates said.
Same
The
here.
only thing I know is that I know nothing. I know I want to learn more every day, and the more I study, the more desperate I get because I need to know more.
Yep.
So I'm sure I will learn more and more with you and your team. And I hope you come back. We can talk about pain. And I can't
Yes.
wait to see you in September in Germany in the World Congress. I'm very
Yes.
happy to be there too. So thank you so much for being here. If you want to make some final remarks about mistletoe to my followers.
Yeah. I just love the idea that we have this plant that we've co-evolved with, that had this amazing sort of download in someone over 100 years ago that saw some way to use it differently, that is really a fellow traveler with us in the oncology world. I think that it has such utility for all of our patients at some form or at some time on their journey. And I really hope you all get curious and learn a bit more about it and maybe apply it to your own process. So thank you again, Janina, for this beautiful, beautiful time together. And to all of
Thank
you,
you.
really grateful. Yay.
Bye-bye.
Mwah. Ciao.
Bom?